husband sold the house with his wife in it. Later he was very surprised to see her at a restaurant. Henry cunningly sold the house with his wife locked inside, thinking that she would soon pass away. Then months later, he was taken aback when he saw her at a restaurant, and then something unexpected happens. Brandon was excited and continuously kept on looking at his watch, waiting for his office hours to get over. Finally, he was about to buy a luxurious mansion also at a cheap price and would be able to start a family with his girlfriend. Meanwhile, the house owner, Henry, was waiting with the papers in his hand, waiting impatiently for Brandon. The workday was over, and the man hurried to the meeting with the owner of the property he wanted. Before signing the documents, the buyer asked, "You know, all this time I couldn't help but worry about one thing. Why is the price for this house 3 times lower than the market price?" Henry seemed thrown off for a moment, but then answered his question saying that he was relocating and wanted to sell the house as soon as possible. Brandon was satisfied with the answer, so he checked the papers and quickly signed them. The next day, he transferred the entire amount due to the owner of the mansion and considered the deal completed. It was a moment of celebration, and therefore, Brandon went to the market and bought a bottle of good wine along with a box of chocolates and other treats that his girlfriend Kelly loved. Having entered the house, the man admired the spacious living room with the fireplace and a huge chandelier over his head. The new owner was 35 years old and still lived in a cheap motel. Finally, he had his own home. Brandon was planning to start a family with his girlfriend Kelly, however, he needed to convince her first. Kelly wasn't yet ready to get married and have kids, but her boyfriend was sure that once she looks at the new house, she would definitely give it a thought. Meanwhile, Brandon was going to enjoy some alone time in the house and have a tour. He went from room to room and reached the second floor, where the renovations had recently been carried out. As the new owner was passing by the half-open bedroom, he suddenly heard some muffled noise. He froze and carefully started walking toward the door, then he peered inside and was completely taken aback. In the bedroom, an emaciated and pale woman was lying on the floor. Looking at her clothes, Brandon thought that the woman must be living in the house. Then he realized why the price of the house was low and wondered if there were many other secrets hidden inside these walls. The 35-year-old man lifted the girl and laid her on the bed, and then she asked the stranger who was he, and what was he doing in the house. Brandon informed her that now he was the new owner of the house. The woman's eyes welled up in tears as she couldn't believe that her dirtbag husband sold the mansion along with her. Having heard this, Brandon turned pale and realized that he had probably fallen victim to a fraudster. "But how did your signature get on the sales documents?" Brandon asked in surprise. In response, the woman only forced a smile and threw her hands up. Then he guessed that the cunning businessman must have forged his wife's signature to sell the house as soon as possible. Brandon felt pity for her when he saw the unspeakable pain and despair in the woman's eyes. The man brought her a glass of water, and after the former owner of the house took a sip, she started crying, unable to stop her tears. While sobbing, the woman narrated the entire story to Brandon, who was patiently listening to her. Her name was Mary, and she was married to Henry for 2 years before a fatal illness took over her body. At first, Henry did everything possible to help his wife. He took her to medical centers and provided her with all the meds. All of Mary's doctors, the oncologists, were in agreement that she had a very good chance of recovery. However, the woman needed to undergo expensive surgery to recover, and that was a problem. The husband no longer wanted to spend so much money on his wife and brutally locked her up inside the house. Henry then soon found a new girlfriend, and together they came up with the plan to sell the house, thinking that Mary would soon pass away. The first thing Brandon did after hearing the sick woman's horrifying story was called the cunning businessman Henry, demanding an explanation. He accused the former owner of the house of fraud, but Henry turned out to be a tough nut to crack. He said the price of the house is at least 3 times below market rate, and as for the woman in the bedroom, she would pass away soon, so you won't have any problems with it, and hung up the phone. Brandon felt responsible for the woman and decided to help her out, and the first thing he did was pay for the surgery. Gradually, he got attracted to Mary, and even put his new house on mortgage and sold his car. The man broke up with Kelly and began to spend more time with his new love. Mary recovered, and after a year they got married, living a happy life, but one day they decided to go out for dinner, and that's where Mary saw him. At first, the woman found the workman's face familiar, and when she looked closely she was surprised. The workman was none other than her ex-husband, Henry, who was desperately trying to hide by pulling a baseball cap over his eyes. Mary didn't tell Brandon what she knew, but simply hugged her husband and gave him a good and passionate kiss. At the same time, tears filled Henry's eyes, as he realized that because of his bitterness and stupidity, he had lost everything important he had in his life.